The admissions committee of Sentinel Prime Academy had made exactly 3 mistakes in its 7,000-year history. The first involved accidentally accepting a sentient fungus colony that proceeded to convert an entire dormitory wing into spores. The second was admitting a student who turned out to be 3 smaller beings stacked inside a tactical suit. The third mistake? Well, that would be Elena Vasquez. I should know. I was the one who processed her application. My name is Krag'thor, and I have served as the Assistant Director of Admissions for Sentinel Prime for the past 40 cycles. In that time, I have reviewed approximately 2 million applications from the most promising warriors, strategists, and future military leaders across 112 species. Not once, not ever, had I encountered anything quite like this. It started on what I thought would be a routine morning. My secondary stomachs were still digesting breakfast, my scales were properly groomed, and I was looking forward to rejecting the usual flood of mediocre candidates who thought having heart or determination somehow compensated for a complete lack of measurable combat aptitude. Honestly, the entitlement of some species never ceased to amaze me. Then her file appeared on my holographic display. "What in the 7 frozen hells of Krag'thor is this?" I muttered, my mandibles clicking in confusion. The application header read, Elena Vasquez, human, age 17, standard cycles. Origin planet, Earth. Now, here is where I need to explain something important. Humans had only joined the galactic community 6 cycles ago. 6. Most species spend at least 50 cycles as probationary members before anyone takes them seriously. The general consensus among the established powers was that humans were, well, adorable in their enthusiasm, but ultimately unremarkable. Decent enough at basic tasks, prone to emotional decision-making, and physically unimpressive compared to proper warrior races like the Krag'thor or the Velkari Battlemasters. So naturally, when a human application crossed my desk, I assumed it was either a joke or a clerical error. I scanned through the file with growing disbelief. Physical assessment score, 972 out of 1,000. That had to be a mistake. Strategic analysis rating, 948. Impossible. Combat simulation results. Perfect scores across 17 different scenarios, including 3 that were designed to be mathematically unsolvable. "Computer," I said, my voice taking on that dangerous calm I reserve for moments of extreme irritation. "Verify the authenticity of application file 773 Alpha 9. "All data verified and cross-referenced," the computer replied in its maddeningly cheerful tone. "No errors detected." I leaned back in my chair, which creaked under my bulk. Either this human had somehow hacked our systems, or something truly bizarre was happening. Neither option was particularly comforting. What really caught my attention, though, was the personal statement. Most applicants wrote flowery nonsense about honor, duty, and their burning desire to serve. Elena Vasquez had written exactly 4 sentences. "I am faster, stronger, and smarter than anyone currently enrolled in your academy. I will prove this within the first week. If I cannot, you may expel me immediately. I look forward to your response." The sheer audacity of it actually made me laugh. A short, barking sound that startled my assistant, Mira, who had just entered with my morning stimulant beverage. "Sir?" she asked, her antenna twitching with curiosity. "Is something amusing?" "Either amusing or deeply concerning," I replied. "Look at this." Mira glanced at the holographic display, her compound eyes widening. "A human. Sir, with all respect, humans are barely classified as combat-capable. Their bone density is laughable. Their reaction times are adequate at best, and they have almost no natural weaponry. Why would we even consider this? That is an excellent question, I said slowly, which is precisely why I am going to approve this application. Mira's antenna went completely rigid. Sir? Think about it, I said, warming to the idea. If this human is fraudulent, we expose a serious security breach in our application system. If she is genuine but fails spectacularly, it serves as an excellent object lesson for other overconfident applicants. And if, by some miracle, she actually possesses these abilities, well, then we have discovered something remarkable. The other instructors will never allow it, Mira warned. Commander Vexkoth, in particular, has been vocal about maintaining standards. Commander Vexkoth, I said with no small amount of pleasure, can file a formal complaint with my secondary posterior orifice. I am approving this application. Prepare the acceptance notification. 3 weeks later, I stood on the primary landing platform of Sentinel Prime Academy, watching the transport ships arrive with the new class of cadets. The academy itself was a marvel of military architecture, built into the side of a moon-sized asteroid that had been hollowed out and reinforced over millennia. Towering spires of reinforced titanium carbide alloy reached toward the stars, while training facilities capable of simulating combat in any environment sprawled across multiple levels. Around me, the other members of the senior staff had gathered to observe the arrivals. This was tradition. The first glimpse of new cadets often told you everything you needed to know about their potential. Commander Vexkoth stood to my right, his forearms crossed over his massive chest. He was a Krag'thor, one of the most feared warrior races in the known galaxy. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor plating, and possessing strength that could bend steel, he represented everything Sentinel Prime valued. Raw power, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to martial excellence. I still cannot believe you approved a human, he rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. This is a prestigious institution, not a charity program for primitive species. The human met all requirements, I replied calmly. In fact, she exceeded them. On paper, Vexkoth snorted. Let us see how she performs when facing real challenges. The first transports were landing now. I watched as cadets from dozens of species disembarked. There were Velkari battle masters, their crystalline exoskeletons glinting in the station's artificial light. A group of Thorian berserkers bounded out, their 6 legs carrying them in powerful leaps. Even a pair of rare silicate tacticians floated down the ramps, their bodies composed of living stone that rearranged itself with each movement. And then I saw her. Elena Vasquez was, in a word, underwhelming. At least, that is what everyone around me clearly thought. She stood approximately 1.7 meters tall, which made her positively tiny compared to most of the other cadets. Her frame appeared delicate, with none of the obvious musculature or natural weapons that typically indicated combat capability. She had brown skin, dark hair pulled back in a simple tail, and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with an unsettling intensity. She wore standard human civilian clothing, simple dark pants and a fitted jacket that did nothing to make her appear more impressive. Where other cadets carried themselves with obvious pride and aggression, she simply walked down the ramp with her hands in her pockets, looking around with what could only be described as mild interest. "That is her?" Vexkoth said, his tone dripping with disdain. "That fragile little thing? Throcknall, you have wasted everyone's time." "Perhaps," I murmured, but something about the way she moved caught my attention. It was subtle. She did not swagger or posture like the others. Instead, she moved with an economy of motion that suggested perfect awareness of her body in space. Every step was precisely placed. Every movement was efficient. And those eyes. They were constantly moving, cataloging everything and everyone around her. The orientation assembly was held in the Grand Amphitheater, a massive space that could hold 10,000 beings comfortably. The new cadets filed in, finding seats according to species groupings. This was not official policy, but it always happened. Beings naturally gravitated toward their own kind. Elena Vasquez sat alone. I watched from the observation platform as Commandant Zirnal, the head of the academy, gave her traditional welcome speech. It was the same speech I had heard 40 times, emphasizing duty, sacrifice, and the supreme importance of excellence. The cadets listened with varying degrees of attention. Elena, I noticed, was not listening at all. She was watching the other students. After the assembly, the cadets were dismissed to their assigned dormitories. This was always a chaotic process. Hundreds of young warriors from different species, all convinced of their own superiority, forced to navigate shared spaces. Conflicts were inevitable. I had a feeling this year would be particularly interesting. The first incident occurred less than 6 hours after arrival. I was in my office, reviewing the final class schedules, when my communication panel chimed urgently. It was Krag'thor, and he sounded almost gleeful. "Throcknall," he said, "you should come to Training Hall 7 immediately. Your human is about to learn a valuable lesson." I arrived at the training hall to find a crowd of cadets gathered in a circle. This was never a good sign. In the center of the circle stood Elena Vasquez, facing off against 3 Krag'thor cadets. Each of them was easily twice her size, with the kind of natural weaponry that had made their species feared across a dozen star systems. The largest of the 3, a young male named Gormak, was addressing her with the kind of condescending tone that immediately made my secondary hearts sink. "You should not be here, human," he said, his massive fists clenching and unclenching. "This academy is for warriors, not fragile little prey animals. Perhaps you should return to your homeworld before you get hurt." Elena tilted her head slightly, her expression completely neutral. "I appreciate your concern," she said, her voice carrying surprising clarity across the hall. "But I am exactly where I belong." "Then prove it," Gormak growled. "Fight me, right now. When I break you, perhaps the admissions committee will realize their mistake." This was the moment. I should have intervened. Academy regulations clearly prohibited unauthorized combat between cadets. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the same instinct that had made me approve her application in the first place. Elena looked around at the gathered crowd, then back at Gormak. "Okay," she said simply, "but let us make this interesting. All 3 of you at once." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Even Krag'thor looked surprised. Gormak's 2 companions, Threk and Vulkar, moved to flank her. The 3 Krag'thor now formed a triangle around the small human, their combined mass easily 10 times hers. To any reasonable observer, this was about to be a massacre. "Whenever you are ready," Elena said, dropping into a loose stance that looked almost casual. Gormak struck first. He was fast for his species, his armored fist blurring forward in a strike that could have shattered reinforced concrete. Elena was not there. She had moved, but I had not seen her move. One moment she was in front of him, the next she was beside him, and his fist was hitting empty air. Before he could recover, Elena kicked him, not in the legs or the body where his armor was thickest, but behind the knee joint where Krag'thor anatomy included a small, vulnerable gap. It was such a specific target that it suggested detailed knowledge of their physiology. Gormak stumbled, more from surprise than actual pain. His companions rushed in immediately. Threk swung a massive backhand that should have caught Elena in the ribs. Instead, she dropped low, so low that her hand touched the ground, and his arm passed over her. While she was down there, she swept his legs out from under him with a kick that somehow generated enough force to topple his massive frame. Vulkar, learning from his companion's mistakes, did not commit to a single strike. Instead, he grabbed for her, his forearms spreading wide to limit her options for escape. It was actually a smart tactical choice. Contain the fast opponent, use superior strength to end the fight. Elena let him grab her. For just a split second, Vulkar's face showed triumph. Then Elena twisted, her entire body spiraling in a way that seemed to defy basic physics, and suddenly she was behind him, with one of his arms locked in a position that made him roar in pain. She rode his back as he thrashed, maintaining the lock with seemingly no effort until he was forced to tap the ground in submission. The entire exchange had taken perhaps 15 seconds. Gormak and Threk were back on their feet now, and the looks on their faces had changed from condescension to genuine anger. They came at her together, coordinating their attacks in a way that showed actual combat training. What happened next was difficult to describe. Elena moved between them like water flowing through cracks in stone. Every strike they threw found empty air. Every grab closed on nothing. And in the spaces between their attacks, she struck back. Never full power. Never attempting to seriously injure. Just precise, technical strikes to nerve clusters, joint vulnerabilities, and pressure points that made them stumble, falter, and eventually slow. It ended with all three Krag'thor on the ground, breathing heavily, while Elena stood in the center of the circle, looking completely unbothered. She was not even breathing hard. The hall was absolutely silent. Elena looked around at the gathered crowd, her expression still neutral. "Anyone else want to help me prove I do not belong here?" she asked. No one answered. She nodded once, then walked toward the exit. The crowd parted before her like she was emitting some kind of repulsion field. As she passed by me, our eyes met for just a moment. There was something in her gaze that I could not quite identify. Not arrogance, not quite satisfaction. Maybe just a simple acknowledgement that she had proven exactly what she said she would prove. After she left, the hall erupted in excited conversation. Cadets from dozens of species were all talking at once, sharing their observations, their theories, their disbelief. I turned to Vexkoth. He was staring at the empty space where the fight had occurred, his mandibles working silently. "Still think I wasted everyone's time?" I asked. He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all traces of condescension. "What is she?" he asked quietly. "Humans are not supposed to be capable of that. Their baseline abilities are documented. They are average at best." "I have no idea," I admitted, "but I intend to find out." That night, I pulled every piece of information available about Elena Vasquez. Official records, medical scans, background checks, everything. What I found only deepened the mystery. She had grown up in a mid-sized settlement on Earth called Sacramento. Her parents were both civilians with no military background. She had attended standard human educational facilities and participated in normal social activities. Nothing in her background suggested anything exceptional. But then I found something interesting. 3 years ago, she had been involved in some kind of accident. The details were sealed under medical privacy protocols, but the little information available indicated she had suffered severe injuries. The prognosis had been poor. 6 months after the accident, she had completely recovered. more than recovered. That was when she started showing the abilities that had eventually led to her applying to Sentinel Prime. I was still reviewing the files when my door chimed. "Enter," I called out. Elena Vasquez walked in. She looked exactly as composed as she had during the fight, showing no signs of nervousness or uncertainty, despite being in the office of a senior academy official. "Cadet Vasquez," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "I was not expecting you." "I wanted to apologize," she said, sitting down with that same efficient economy of movement. "The fight was unauthorized. I should not have engaged." "You were provoked," I pointed out, "and technically, you did not throw the first strike." "Still," she said, "it was not how I wanted to start my time here." We sat in silence for a moment. I studied her, trying to reconcile what I had seen with what I knew about human capabilities. Finally, I decided on direct approach. "What are you?" I asked. She did not seem surprised by the question. "I am human," she said simply. "Humans do not move like that. Humans do not possess that level of strength or speed or combat awareness." "Most humans do not," she agreed. "But I am not most humans." "The accident," I said, watching her face carefully. 3 years ago. What happened?" Her expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. "I died," she said, matter-of-factly. For approximately 4 minutes my heart stopped beating. When they brought me back, I was different. Different how? She considered the question. Everything that makes humans weak, all the biological limitations and inefficiencies, they were gone. My neural pathways optimized themselves. My muscle density increased without adding bulk. My sensory processing accelerated. I did not become something other than human. I just became what humans could be if evolution had another 1,000,000 years to work with. Sat back in my chair, trying to process this. And Earth's medical community just let you leave? Surely they wanted to study you. "They tried," she said with a slight smile. "I convinced them it was not necessary." The way she said it made me suspect that "convinced" was a polite euphemism. "Why come here?" I asked. "You could have stayed on Earth, been celebrated as a miracle. Instead, you chose one of the most difficult military academies in the galaxy." "Because on Earth, I would always be a miracle," she said. "An anomaly to be studied and protected. Here, I can be a soldier. I can be useful. I can find out what I am actually capable of when pushed to my limits." There was something both admirable and slightly concerning about that statement. "You realize," I said carefully, "that your presence here will change everything. The other cadets will see you as either a threat or a target. The instructors will not know how to train you. And if word spreads about what you can do, there are species and factions in the galaxy who will want to either recruit you or eliminate you." "I know," she said. "But that is going to happen whether I am here or somewhere else. At least here, I will have structure, discipline, and purpose." I could not argue with that logic. "Very well," I said. "But understand this, Cadet Vasquez. I approved your application, but that does not mean you will receive special treatment. You will be held to the same standards as every other cadet. Higher standards, perhaps, given what you have already demonstrated. If you fail, you will be expelled. If you break regulations, you will face consequences. Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear, sir," she said, standing. "Thank you for the opportunity." She left my office, and I sat alone with my thoughts. I had a feeling that accepting Elena Vasquez was going to prove far more complicated than any of my previous 2 mistakes. But I also had a feeling that it was going to be infinitely more interesting. The real question was whether the galaxy was ready for what she represented. Somehow, I doubted it. The following morning brought what I can only describe as controlled pandemonium. News of Elena's performance had spread through the academy faster than a plasma fire in an oxygen-rich environment. By breakfast, every single cadet knew about the human who had taken down 3 Krag'thor warriors without breaking a sweat. I watched the cafeteria feeds from my office, observing the social dynamics shift in real time. Some cadets gave Elena a wide berth, clearly intimidated. Others watched her with calculating eyes, already planning their own challenges. A few, the smarter ones, seemed to be considering the advantages of having her as an ally rather than an enemy. Elena herself appeared oblivious to all the attention. She sat alone at a corner table, methodically working through her meal while reading something on a datapad. The isolation did not seem to bother her in the slightest. "She is going to be a problem," Krag'thor said from behind me. I had not heard him enter, which was impressive given his size. The other cadets will not tolerate someone so far above their level. It disrupts the natural hierarchy. Then perhaps they should work harder to match her level, I replied without turning around. "You know it does not work that way," he said, moving to stand beside me. "She is an anomaly. Anomalies create instability, and instability in a military academy leads to incidents. What do you suggest? Expel her for being too competent?" "I suggest we test her properly," Krag'thor said, his tone thoughtful. "Place her in the advanced combat scenarios immediately. Skip the standard progression. If she is truly as capable as she appears, she will adapt. If not, we will discover her limits quickly." I considered this. It was unorthodox, but then again, so was Elena. "Very well," I said, "but we do this properly. No setting her up to fail. Genuine assessment." "Of course," Krag'thor agreed, though something in his voice made me wonder if we shared the same definition of genuine assessment. The first advanced scenario was scheduled for that afternoon. Standard protocol required cadets to complete at least 6 weeks of basic training before attempting these simulations, but Elena had waived that requirement when I explained the situation. She seemed almost eager for the challenge. The scenario itself was designated Omega-7, and it had a failure rate of 92% among 4th-year cadets. The setup was simple in concept, but brutal in execution. Infiltrate a heavily fortified enemy position, extract a high-value target, and escape while being pursued by numerically superior forces. The simulation included environmental hazards, limited resources, and adaptive enemy AI that learned from cadet tactics. I joined Krag'thor and several other instructors in the observation gallery overlooking the simulation chamber. Below us, the massive space was already transforming, holographic projectors and physical obstacles combining to create a nightmarish urban warfare environment. Crumbling buildings, narrow alleyways, and defensive positions manned by enemy forces stretched across multiple city blocks. Elena entered through the deployment gate, wearing standard academy combat gear. She had been given a basic energy weapon, a combat knife, and nothing else. No support team, no advanced equipment, no backup plan. "Beginning simulation in 10 seconds, the computer announced. Objective: extract asset gamma from Structure 9. Enemy force composition: 47 hostiles. Mixed capabilities. Environmental hazards active. Good luck, cadet." The simulation began. Elena did not move for a full 5 seconds. She simply stood at the deployment point, eyes scanning the environment with that same unsettling intensity I had noticed before. Then, without warning, she sprinted directly toward the heaviest concentration of enemy forces. "What is she doing?" one of the instructors muttered. "That is the exact opposite of stealth protocol." But I was beginning to understand. Elena was not approaching this like a standard infiltration. She was gathering information. The first enemy patrol spotted her almost immediately. 4 holographic soldiers raised their weapons and opened fire. Elena moved like liquid shadow, her body flowing between the incoming fire with movements that seemed to predict where each shot would be before it was fired. She closed the distance in seconds, and then the patrol was down. Not killed. The simulation did not allow for lethal force, but incapacitated so quickly that I had to review the footage to understand what had happened. She had used their own positions against them, forcing them into crossfire situations, redirecting their aim, and exploiting the microsecond delays in their reaction times. It was like watching a master musician play a complex instrument. "She is analyzing the AI patterns," Krag'thor said quietly, "using that first engagement to understand how the enemies will react." He was right. Elena's next 3 encounters were even more efficient. She was learning the simulation's rules and exploiting them with surgical precision. 20 minutes into the 45-minute time limit, she reached Structure 9. The building was surrounded by defensive positions and automated turrets. Standard doctrine required at least a full squad to breach this location. Elena was alone. She spent 2 minutes observing from cover, then did something that made several instructors gasp. She walked directly up to the front entrance and knocked on the door. The enemy AI, not programmed for such an absurd tactic, hesitated for a crucial second. Elena used that second to hack the door control with a device she had apparently constructed from pieces of a disabled turret. The door opened, and she was inside before the confused defenders could respond. What followed was a masterclass in close-quarters combat. The building's interior was a maze of corridors and rooms, each containing multiple hostiles. Elena moved through them like a ghost, using sound, shadow, and the enemy's own momentum against them. She barely used her weapon, instead relying on environmental takedowns and hand-to-hand techniques that exploited every weakness in the simulation's combat system. She located Asset Gamma, a holographic representation of a captured officer, in 12 minutes. Then came the hard part, extraction. The simulation AI, realizing it was losing, deployed its reserve forces. Elena now had to escape through a building filling with enemies while protecting a non-combat asset. The difficulty had just increased exponentially. Elena looked at the holographic officer for a moment, then at the window behind him. She smiled slightly, and I knew we were about to see something interesting. She grabbed a heavy equipment locker and hurled it through the window. The crash brought enemies running from multiple directions. While they converged on the noise, Elena and the asset went out a different window, rappelling down using cables she had fashioned from destroyed equipment. They hit the ground in an alley 3 stories below. Immediately, enemy forces began closing in from both ends of the narrow passage. Elena was trapped, except she was not trapped. She was exactly where she wanted to be. The alley became a killing zone, but not for Elena. The narrow space meant enemies could only approach in limited numbers. Their own formation became their weakness. Elena positioned the asset behind cover, and then proceeded to demonstrate why humans had earned a reputation, at least in their own history, as persistence hunters. She did not fight to win each engagement. She fought to exhaust, to frustrate, to force mistakes. Every enemy she incapacitated reduced the effectiveness of those remaining. Every second she held that position was a second closer to extraction. The simulation threw everything at her. Aerial drones, heavy assault units, even environmental hazards like collapsing structures and chemical clouds. Elena adapted to each new threat with a speed that suggested she was not just reacting, but predicting based on probability assessment. 38 minutes into the simulation, She reached the extraction point with asset gamma intact. She had neutralized 41 of 47 enemies and avoided the rest through tactical positioning. Her success rate was 97%. The simulation ended. Elena stood in the extraction zone, breathing heavily for the first time since I had met her. She looked up at the observation gallery and gave a small nod. The gallery was absolutely silent. Even Vexkoth seemed at a loss for words. "Well," I finally said, "I believe that answers some questions." "And raises 1,000 more," Vexkoth replied. "Throcknall, that performance was not just exceptional. It was unprecedented. She did not just pass Omega-7. She destroyed it. She found weaknesses in our simulation that we did not know existed." Over the next 3 weeks, Elena continued to shatter every expectation. She topped the academic rankings in tactical analysis, xenobiology, and military history. Her physical scores were so far above the baseline that we had to recalibrate the testing equipment twice. And in every practical exercise, she demonstrated capabilities that forced us to rethink how we trained everyone else. But the most interesting development was not her performance. It was how the other cadets responded to her. At first, there was resentment. Many saw her as a threat to their own prospects. Why work hard when someone was so naturally superior? But Elena did something unexpected. She started helping them. I first noticed it during a hand-to-hand combat session. A Thorian cadet named Krag'thor was struggling with a particular defensive technique. His physiology made the standard approach awkward. Elena watched for a few minutes, then approached the instructor and suggested a modification that worked with Thorian joint structure rather than against it. The technique worked perfectly. Krag'thor went from bottom of the class to middle tier in a single afternoon. She did this again and again. Never condescending, never showing off. She simply saw problems and offered solutions. When a group of Velkari cadets were struggling with zero-gravity combat protocols, she spent her free time developing alternative training methods. When a silicate tactician could not complete an obstacle course due to the design favoring species with traditional mobility, Elena redesigned sections to be more inclusive while maintaining difficulty. Slowly, the social isolation broke down. Cadets began seeking her advice. Study groups formed around her. She became less of an anomaly and more of an unexpected leader. I watched this transformation with fascination. Elena had not tried to dominate through superiority. She had built bridges through competence and genuine desire to see others succeed. "She is changing the entire dynamic of the academy," Instructor Mylarix observed during a staff meeting. "Cadets are collaborating across species lines in ways we have never seen before. They are sharing techniques, learning from each other's strengths, all because she set the example." "It is remarkable," I agreed, though I suspect it was not her intention. She simply sees inefficiency and works to correct it. Vexkoth, who had been silent for most of the meeting, finally spoke. "There is something you all should know," he said heavily. "I have been contacted by representatives from 3 different military organizations. They have heard rumors about our exceptional human cadet. They are offering substantial incentives for information about her capabilities." The room went cold. This was exactly the scenario I had warned Elena about. "What did you tell them?" I asked carefully. "That all cadet information is confidential, and any attempt to breach that confidentiality would be considered an act of aggression against the Academy," Vexkoth replied. "But they will not stop. She has become too visible, too impressive. Eventually, someone will make a move." "Then we need to prepare her," Instructor Mylarix said. She needs to understand the political implications of her existence. I had that conversation with Elena 2 days later. We met in a secure briefing room, just the two of us. "You are aware that your performance has attracted outside attention," I said without preamble. "I assumed it would," Elena replied calmly. "Exceptional capability always draws interest from those who want to exploit it. These are not academic institutions or research facilities," I warned. "These are military contractors, intelligence agencies, and in one case, an organization known for acquiring assets through less than legal means. You are telling me I might be kidnapped. I am telling you that people will try." Elena considered. "This. What do you suggest?" "Complete your training here, but keep a lower profile. Stop volunteering for the most difficult scenarios. Stop helping every struggling cadet. Make yourself less visible." She shook her head. "That defeats the entire purpose of why I came here. I did not come to hide. I came to become the best version of myself and to help others do the same." "Even if it puts you at risk?" "Especially then," she said firmly. "Fear of what others might do cannot dictate how I live. That is not surviving. That is just slow death." I understood her position, but I also understood the reality of galactic politics. "Then we need to change your status," I said. "Currently, you are a cadet, which means limited protections. But if you were to be commissioned as an officer, you would fall under full Academy jurisdiction and treaty protections." "I have only been here for 3 weeks," Elena pointed out. "Standard commissioning requires 4 years of training." "Standard commissioning, yes," I agreed. "But the Academy Charter includes provisions for field commissions in cases of exceptional merit. You would still need to complete your education, but your official status would provide legal protections." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "What would that mean practically?" she finally asked. "It would mean you are no longer just a student. You would be an officer of Sentinel Prime Academy with all the responsibilities and protections that entails. It would also mean that any attempt to recruit or abduct you would be considered an act of war against the Academy and its affiliated governments. And the cost? You would be bound to serve the Academy for a minimum of 10 cycles after graduation. You would also be expected to take on additional responsibilities in training and mentoring other cadets." Elena smiled slightly. "So basically formalizing what I am already doing, but with the added benefit of not being kidnapped." "Essentially, yes." "Then I accept." The commissioning ceremony was held 3 days later. It was unprecedented, which seemed to be a theme where Elena was concerned. Every cadet and most of the instructors attended. Word had spread that something historic was happening. Commandant Zirinal presided over the ceremony, her ancient form still radiating authority despite her advanced age. She spoke of merit, sacrifice, and the sacred duty of those who protected the innocent. Then she turned to Elena. "Cadet Vasquez," she said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "You have demonstrated capabilities far beyond your time in service. You have shown not only exceptional skill, but also the character and judgment required of leadership. It is my honor to grant you field commission to the rank of Junior Officer of Sentinel Prime Academy." Elena knelt, and Zirinal placed the officer's insignia on her uniform. When she rose, she was no longer just a cadet. She was part of the Academy's command structure. The assembled crowd erupted in applause. Not polite, ceremonial applause, but genuine enthusiasm. Cadets from dozens of species were cheering for the human who had somehow earned their respect in just 3 weeks. I caught Vexkoth's eye from across the room. He nodded slowly, acknowledgement of a job well done. After the ceremony, I found Elena on one of the exterior observation decks. She was staring out at the stars, her expression thoughtful. "Having second thoughts?" I asked, joining her at the railing. "Not exactly," she said. "Just wondering if I am ready for what comes next." "You faced down 3 Krag'thor warriors on your first day," I pointed out. "You destroyed our most difficult simulation. You unified cadets who have been training to see each other as rivals. What could possibly make you doubt your readiness?" "All of that was about individual capability," Elena said. "Now I am responsible for others. That is different. That is heavier." She was right, of course. Leadership was always harder than personal excellence. "Can I tell you something?" I asked. "When I approved your application, I thought I was taking a calculated risk. At best, I expected you to be interesting. At worst, I expected you to be a cautionary tale. I never imagined you would become this." "What is this?" Elena asked. "Hope," I said simply. "You represent something we had forgotten. That limits are often self-imposed. That different does not mean inferior. That excellence can inspire, rather than intimidate. You did not just prove that one human could succeed here. You proved that everyone here could be better than they thought possible." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "That is a lot of pressure," she finally said. "Welcome to leadership," I replied with a laugh. "The pressure never goes away. You just get better at carrying it." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Somewhere out there were people who wanted to use Elena for their own purposes. Somewhere out there were those who saw her as a threat. But here, in this moment, she was simply a young officer finding her place in the universe. "Sir," Elena said eventually, "thank you for taking the chance on me." "Thank you for proving me right," I replied. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow, we start your actual training." "Actual training? What do you call what I have been doing?" "Orientation," I said with a grin. "The real challenges start now." Elena laughed, a sound I had not heard from her before. It was genuine and warm and utterly human. As I left her there, contemplating the infinite expanse of space, I reflected on how strange the universe could be. We had built Sentinel Prime Academy to forge the greatest warriors, strategists, and leaders from across the known galaxy. We had systems, protocols, and centuries of tradition guiding every decision. And then a single human girl showed up and reminded us that sometimes the greatest achievements come not from following the rules perfectly, but from being brave enough to rewrite them. Elena Vasquez had been accepted by error, or so it seemed. But perhaps the real error would have been missing the opportunity to learn from her. She had not just changed the academy. She had changed how we thought about potential itself. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless species and infinite possibilities. But in that moment, I was certain of one thing. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Sentinel Prime Academy was better prepared to face them because we had taken a chance on one extraordinary human. And really, is that not what education is supposed to be about? Taking chances on the extraordinary, even when it arrives in unexpected packages? 3 months later, Elena led her first training squad through a complex joint operation exercise. Her team included a Krag'thor, 2 Velkari, a Thorian, and a Silicate. They moved together with a cohesion that would have been impossible before her arrival. Different species, different capabilities, united by shared purpose and mutual respect. I watched from the observation deck as they completed the mission with a efficiency rating that broke Academy records. When they emerged from the simulation chamber, They were not celebrating individual glory. They were celebrating together, a true team. Krag'thor stood beside me, his massive arms crossed, but his expression thoughtful. "She really did change everything," he said quietly. "Yes," I agreed, "she did." "Do you think she knows how important she is?" I thought about Elena's consistent humility, her focus on helping others rather than aggrandizing herself. "I think she knows," I said. "But I also think she would say, any of us could have done the same thing if we had been willing to try." And would she be right? That was the question, was it not? Elena Vasquez was exceptional by any measure. But how much of that exceptionalism was innate ability? And how much was simply unwavering determination to be better? "I suppose," I said slowly, "we are all about to find out. She has set a new standard. Now we have to see if everyone else can rise to meet it." Down in the chamber, Elena was talking with her team, analyzing their performance, already planning how to improve next time. Always forward, always growing, always pushing boundaries. The admissions committee of Sentinel Prime Academy had made 3 mistakes in its 7,000-year history. The first 2 had been embarrassments. The third mistake, accepting Elena Vasquez, turned out to be the best decision we ever made. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, and sometimes, just sometimes, our errors lead us exactly where we need to go.